We'll study a little bit this morning. Thank you guys for allowing me to be your guest today. My name is Lonnie. I live in the Huntsville area. I actually live in Gurley. So I came over through the valley or down around Winchester and through Huntsville this morning and had a beautiful drive. And I've been here several years ago during one of the ministry camps, but it's been quite a little bit ago. And, in Huntsville, I'm in private practice as a licensed professional counselor, and I have a small consulting business. A couple of days a week I see clients, and a couple of days a week I teach various things. My largest contract is with a group called CIT International, where I teach crisis intervention and de-escalation to police officers. And then I dabble in a few other little things. But I moved to Huntsville in '86 with my wife to be a youth and family minister. We ministered there for a long time until I went into private practice. I'm still active in ministry. I'm just part-time at a church and don't have an office. And we've got a gospel meeting this week, so I didn't have a class to teach. So when Cody called and said, "Hey, Little Mountain needs a speaker," I said, "Well, I'm actually off the hook for a day." And so I came over here and am looking forward to studying with you. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever been around anybody work with electricity. I don't understand much about electricity. My knowledge of electricity comes from a sign on the back of one of my buddy's trucks. It says, "Danger, high voltage." Not only will this kill you, it will hurt the whole time you are dying. And that's probably all I really need to. But if you've ever been around those guys and they start talking about capacitors and loads and volts and ohms and watts, you ever been with anybody and they assumed you knew what they were talking about and you didn't? I mean, okay. Or talk to a guy with computers. We were doing a presentation, and our computer that linked to the presentation board went on the fritz. I'm in a room with about 6 federal marshals, all law enforcement type, high and tight haircuts, 5'11" pants, shirts untucked. Dude walks in the door, hair down about the middle of his waist, scraggly beard, black pants, black socks, black shoes, black shirt. Said, "I'm the IT guy." I said, "I knew that." Well, he walked in and began to explain, and after his first 3 or 4 sentences, I was lost on what he was talking about. I think inadvertently, we sometimes do that in church. I think we assume that everybody is on the same page when it comes to what we do. So a lot of times when I'm a guest speaker, I kind of give what I call a Bible study 101. So when we study our Bibles, understanding, number one, how the English Bible is organized, and then number 2, kind of give a case study on how to operate with some text. First of all, if you've got an English translation, you'll notice that the books are arranged Old Testament, New Testament. If you read Genesis to Nehemiah, you've read the entire Old Testament story. That is the narrative of the beginning of the world, the creation of the nation of Israel, the deportation of the nation of Israel, and Israel coming back and rebuilding the temple and the city of Jerusalem. Everything after the book of Nehemiah, you could take and put between Genesis and Nehemiah, and it would be more chronological. But we did not organize the English Bible chronologically. We grouped it as major prophets, minor prophets, wisdom literature, and that kind of stuff. So when you read your Bible, if you say, "Hey, this year I'm going to read the Old Testament," if you would do a little research, you could probably even find a timeline on the internet. You could say, as I'm reading through 1st and 2nd Kings, I also need to read Isaiah and Jeremiah. As you read 2nd Chronicles, you probably need to read Ecclesiastes in association with the reign of Solomon. And so if you read it chronologically, it'll make a little more sense to you. So Genesis to Nehemiah, the entire Old Testament story, everything after that fits between that. Then after the close of the book of Nehemiah, you have a 400-year period of silence. There's not a lot of prophet activity going on, not a lot happening. You've got the resettlement of the Palestinian era. You've got some historical events, and eventually, at the opening of the New Testament, you've got a world controlled by Rome. The Roman armies have come in and invaded and taken possession of most of the land you could put your foot on, Rome owns. So you get to the way the New Testament book is organized, or the New Testament, and you get Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And a good summary is who is Jesus and what does it mean to follow him. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called synoptic gospels. Synopsis means seem the same. So you basically get the same kinds of stories. Matthew's more interested in proving that Jesus is the Messiah of prophecy. Mark seems to be more talking to a Roman audience about Jesus as a man of action. And then Luke is actually kind of like a research paper proving to a fellow named Theophilus who Jesus was. I really think Luke in Acts probably went to Rome with Paul when Paul was on trial. I think it's his defense text, that Paul is not guilty of sedition, that Paul's not a troublemaker, that everywhere Paul went, the people who caused trouble were the Jews, because it's addressed to the same guy, most excellent Theophilus. But anyway, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who is Jesus? What does it mean to follow him? And then after Jesus ascends to heaven, he leaves his apostles, and he tells the original apostles, you make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples. So you get to the book of Acts. And if you were to take what we translate as the book Acts and look at it in Greek, the Greek word for the name of Acts looks like our word practices. The practices of the apostles. What did these guys who followed Jesus do after Jesus left? And you can outline the book of Acts either geographically. You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth. Or you can do it biographically, Peter and Paul. But what you'll find out that at the opening of the book of Acts, Jesus ascends to heaven. And then the disciples of the apostles wait on him in Jerusalem. They're endowed with the Spirit. And they begin to preach the word. And then the word begins to spread. Every time Satan persecutes the church, it's like going out here in your yard and kicking a dandelion. That does not eliminate dandelions. Okay? You kick that thing, it spreads out everywhere. So you look at what these early Christians did after Jesus left, and you'll find that they went to the city of Corinth. They went to the city of Thessalonica. You'll encounter a young man named Timothy. You'll encounter a young man named Titus. And so after you read who is Jesus and what does it mean to follow him and what did Jesus' followers do after he left, and you run into these people and these places and these events, then you have a series of letters. And those letters, oh, look, they're written to cities like Corinth and Ephesus and Colossae and Galatia and Timothy and Titus. And so you find that these mature Christians, first-tier followers of Jesus, are now writing information to younger Christians or mission-field churches who were struggling and telling them how to solve problems. If you, as you study your New Testament, and especially you read the letters of Paul, you say, hey, what problem was he addressing? What characteristic of Jesus did he use to solve the problem? And then you make that application. You have what we call task theology. Learning something and then applying it to a problem. And so there's kind of how your Bible is organized. The problem with the organization is that as preachers, we'll get up in front of an audience and we'll preach 30 minutes on 3 verses. Or we'll be in an adult Bible class and we'll go, please read verse 1. And somebody will read verse 1. And then you say, what do you think that means? Well, I think it means what it says. And then you look over here and say, what do you think? Well, I agree with Bob. And so we study it verse by verse by verse. The problem with verse by verse by verse is the Bible wasn't written with verses. When you look at the Bible, the verses are there to help us make a reference to what we're talking about, or probably were markers so that the guys translating you can keep up with where they were. And if you read just verse by verse, we tend to lose the macro, if that makes a difference. You know, a big picture versus a little picture. I mean, one of my favorite stories is about 3 little blind mice. And they find an elephant. And they start crawling around on the elephant trying to figure out what an elephant is. And one little mouse goes down the elephant's trunk. And he says, I know what an elephant's like. An elephant's like a snake. One little mouse finds the elephant's big old leg and says, hey, I know what the elephant's like. The elephant's like a tree. Another mouse finds the elephant's ear and says, I know what the elephant's like. The elephant is like a fan. They are all partially right. But they are all absolutely wrong. So when we read the Bible without what I call a view of 10,000 feet, looking at the whole thing, and we get lost in the details, sometimes we miss some things. when I do a textual study, say of a book, I usually tell folks that, when you study a book in 1 or 2 sessions, or maybe even 4, think about a creek running through the woods. Well, that creek has shallow spots and deep spots. Well, before I do anything with the deep and the shallow spots, I'm going to get on the rocks and see where the creek starts and where the creek ends. And so a lot of times I study the Bible by stepping from stone to stone to stone, and then go back and stop and say, now let's look at this pool. And you get off in it and see what's in the bottom. And so as an example of studying things in context, and that's the real thing, is learning to study your Bible in context. When I study the Bible, I look for 3 things: facts, concepts, and applications. Now, you understand the facts is who's writing it, who's it written to, where were they at, how many of them were there, how big, how small, how high, how low, how many. And then once I understand those, and that's defining your words, by the way. Look up any words you don't understand and make sure you're defining that word according to their culture, not our culture. And once I understand the facts, then those facts lead to concepts: truth, righteousness, peace, whatever. And then once I understand those concepts can lead to applications. I goof around with ropes and cables. In fact, we were talking about zip lines at the beginning. If I could attach, and I'd have to through bolt it, but if I could attach a piece of steel cable to the side of this pew and stretch it to the side of this pew and get it banjo string tight, the angle in the middle would be 180 degrees. It'd be flat. If I put weight in the middle of that downward, I would put 575% of my weight on both ends of this. I pull the arms off these pews. A lot of times when I'm cutting trees, I'll shoot a line up in a tree and stretch it and then pull sideways, called a vector pull. And it'll make that tree lean anywhere you want it to lean. Now, the question is, if I did this vertically and could pull the arms off those pews, what happened if I pulled horizontally? Would it create the same amount of force? Well, yeah. Anything that's true vertical is true horizontal. So anything that works between me and God will probably work between me and you. And anything God tells me to do with me and you probably involves something with me and Him. So once you find the concepts, it doesn't have to just be this way. It can also be this way. So facts lead to concepts, and concepts lead to applications. Does that make sense? Now, one of the things that we do sometimes is we stop studying when we run into a big black number. I'm reading my Bible and all of a sudden, boom, the chapter changed. I go, well, Paul's done with that. I like to do just walk through a large section of Scripture and show how I think the macro looks. Now, are there some micro things you're going to skip? Yeah, absolutely. But don't look at a big view, okay? So Matthew chapter 24. I'm going to set the scene for us first. Now, Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Surely I say to you that not one stone will be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." So they're walking outside the temple. Now, the temple is built on Mount Moriah. Moriah is the same mountain that God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on. When you get to where, if this is the temple, on the back side of the temple is the Roman fortress Antonia, where Pilate would have been in residence when Jesus was condemned to die. When Jesus gets his death sentence, he is within a football field of where Abraham sacrificed Isaac. This location is not coincidental. This location is not accidental. God said, you sacrifice your only son here. Thousands of years later, his only son was condemned to die here. So they walk outside the temple on the side of Mount Moriah. If you come out of the southern gate of the temple, you go down this little pig trail, basically, and you go into the Kidron Valley, and then you walk up the side of another little hill called the Mount of Olives, and halfway up the Mount of Olives is a garden called Gethsemane. Jesus spent a lot of time there. So as you walked out of the temple, now Solomon's temple, when it was originally built, had the footprint of a basketball court, about 90 feet long, 45 feet wide, maybe 3 stories tall. That was it. That was Solomon's temple. Now everything in it was gold. It was over. If you had a crack and you could feel it, it was filled with gold. I mean, it was opulent. You get to the first century, and Herod is rebuilding the temple, and you've got the original 90 by 45 sanctuary, but then you've got a court, and you've got colonnades, and you've got porches, and you've got stockades, and you've got dormitories. The temple in Jesus' day was more of a campus than it was a building. And there are blocks in the foundation of the temple that would be about the size of this middle aisle to the roof, that were hand cut and dragged on site. Now, interestingly enough, if you're standing in Jerusalem and you look west, in those days, it would have been a big bare rock. You ever seen a rock quarry? Well, a rock quarry, once they mine it out, looks bare, looks like a skull. Well, 650 yards outside the city of Jerusalem is where they took Jesus and crucified him. The stone that the builders rejected was probably crucified in a rock quarry. These things are not incidental, not accidental. But you get into Solomon's temple, or Herod's temple, and you start walking off that little hill, that side of the temple could have been 16 stories tall. Gleaming white, hand-cut blocks, set perfectly together. This was a 40-year construction project. And so the disciples walk out, and these are Galilean fishermen. These are old country boys. And they walk out of this temple, and they see that soaring edifice, and they say, Jesus, look at that building. Look how huge. Isn't that magnificent? And Jesus says, let me tell you something. Not one stone's going to be left on the other. You ever been excited about something and somebody ran on your parade? I'm going to do this and this. That ain't going to work. And you just, well, that's what he does. These guys walk out of the temple and they're bragging about how big it is. And Jesus goes, yeah, it ain't going to be standing long. And so they walk down into the valley and they walk back up on the side of the Mount of Olives, and they're sitting there in this little garden. Scene 2, Matthew 24:3. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him in private and said, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So Jesus has told them this about the temple, and it upset them. In their minds, if we don't have a temple, the world has ended. And they want to know when is this going to happen? So he's sitting there, probably trying to relax, and these guys are bumping them gums. They come, Lord, when? And they ask, thinking they'd ask one question. When's the temple going to be destroyed, and when's the world going to end? They've actually asked 2 questions. Because the destruction of the temple is not related to the end of the world, but they don't know that. And so they're asking him about the end of the world and the destruction of the temple. They think they've asked 1 question, but they've really asked 2. And you start at the next verse, and in my Bible, it's red letter edition. The red letters go all the way to the end of chapter 25. Now, I know, just like me, you've heard people teach lessons on the parable of the talents. You've heard people teach a lesson on the parable of the virgins. You've heard people teach a lesson on the parable of the almond tree. You've heard all these things broken up into little sections, when in all actuality, it's one dialogue designed to answer 2 questions. Isn't that interesting? Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to stop on the rock and drop off, but until you get the overall picture of what he's saying, we miss something that is large concept, globally important. A couple of things to add, and we'll skip through some of this, but notice first of all, chapter 24, verse 4. Take heed that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name saying I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that none of these things trouble you, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in various places, and all these things are the beginning of sorrows. Jesus says, you're going to hear people say, I'm the Messiah. You're going to hear people say, Jesus has come back. You're going to watch stuff and hear news about wars, rumors of wars, kingdom against kingdom, famines and floods and earthquakes and pestilence. And they don't indicate anything other than you live on a planet controlled by physics and a planet populated by selfish people. Because selfish people fight each other for stuff. My grandmother was born in 1900. And we'd be sitting there watching that old black and white TV, and I think Vietnam was going on, and she would go, oh, wars and rumors of war. Read your Bible, Granny. It don't mean nothing. The planet's going to freeze, the planet's going to melt. No, your planet has climate life cycles, and it does stuff. And earthquakes and famines and pestilence don't indicate anything about the end of the world. The end of the world comes when God punches the button. And there's nothing you can do to cause it, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And Jesus says, when you hear people getting all out, he says, look, that doesn't indicate anything. Planets go through life cycles, and wars and rumors of wars and famine and pestilence. It means we live on a world populated by selfish people, corrupted by sin, controlled by physics. And then he begins to tell them some things about the signs of the end of Jerusalem. Verse 15. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, now if you read this, you need to understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Jesus says, listen, there's going to be something happen that would fit the description of what Daniel talks about when he talks about the abomination of desolation. Now, he's not talking about the specific abomination of desolation, but it's type and kind. He says, when you see this happening, you'll know it's the end of Jerusalem. And by the way, when the Roman army marches, it's no secret. It doesn't catch anybody by surprise. Nobody wakes up and goes, what? I didn't know they were coming. You know. And so Vespasian, and Jerusalem was the rock that broke the career of a lot of Roman politicians. You read about guys who were stationed in Jerusalem as a Roman governor or a Roman emperor or a Roman tetrarch, and you don't hear much about them after their career in Jerusalem. Herod Agrippa, Pontius Pilate. Anybody ever done any Pilates? It's an exercise routine. Pilate, spear. Strengthen your core so you can be straight as a spear. Pontius Pilates, Pontius the spear. He was a seriously decorated Roman soldier and probably would have ended up being the Caesar had he not been stationed in Jerusalem around 30 to 33 AD and had this mess on his hands called the crucifixion of Jesus. He basically disappears from history after his time in Jerusalem. But the Jewish people were always causing problems. There's a group of people called the Zealots. They marched down and destroyed a Roman outpost. And when they destroyed that Roman outpost, Vespasian said, I'm done with Jerusalem. I'm going to go there and stomp that little hornet's nest out. And they start marching. The emperor dies. Vespasian is called back to Rome. He gets to be the emperor. And several years later, he sends his son Titus. Says, hey, got some unfinished business in Jerusalem. Go clean that mess up. And they do. They surround Jerusalem. They build earthworks against it. They batter down the wall. Josephus will tell us that 1 million Jews were crucified outside the city of Jerusalem in 70 AD. When the Romans breach and go into the temple court, the priest, in order to keep the pagans from getting their gold, will swallow the gold, and the Romans would cut it out of them standing there. The abomination of desolation. Jesus said, when this happens, you'll know it. It's not going to catch anybody by surprise. It's not going to be anything. When the Romans come to town, everybody knows it. Lord, when will these things be? Let me tell you, when Jerusalem is destroyed, it will be known. It won't be a secret. And if you live in Jerusalem, you better run to the mountains. And you better pray that you're not carrying a baby in your womb. And you better pray that you're not nursing a baby. Because it's going to be hard. Hope it's not on the Sabbath day, and hope it's not in the wintertime. And that's basically, he's warning them that when this happens, it'll be as obvious as a lady in labor or blossoms on an almond tree. It's going to be spring. And he warns them of that. Then, in verse 29, he gives them a hint about the end of the world. Now, he'll say about the city of Jerusalem and that destruction, he'll say, these things, this generation won't pass till you see these things. This is 29 to 30 AD, and he's saying that by the time, and within 40 years, the destruction of Jerusalem will happen. And so he says, Jerusalem will be destroyed. There'll be lots of things that will have to take place before the end of the world, but it won't be like the destruction of Jerusalem. And then you get down to verse 36. But, you hear that juxtaposition word? You can predict when Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. You'll see the Romans marching. It'll be as obvious as a lady in labor. It'll be as obvious as a blossom on a fig tree. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. For as the days of Noah were, will the coming of the Son of Man be. For in the days before the flood they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. He says, when the end of the world comes, it will be rampant. And just like in the days of Noah, people will be going about their business without any warning, and boom, cataclysmic end of the world. Okay? So, can you predict when Rome is going to invade? Yeah. When they start marching out of Spain and start getting on the boats, somebody will say, hey, I was shopping and saw this. It won't be a surprise. But now, of the end of the world, nobody knows. My Father knows. He hasn't told me. He hasn't told the angels. And so he's prepping them for now a discussion of the end of the world. Verse 45, who then is the faithful and wise servant who his master rule over his household, giving food in due season? Blessed is the servant whom when his master comes will find him so doing. Jesus says, I can't tell you when the end of the world will be, but I can tell you how to prepare for the end of the world. You basically are a servant who's been put in charge of something, and you better do your job till the master comes back. And then he elaborates on how to prepare for the end of the world. Now, I've done this study several places, and a lot of times you speak places and they want you to give a title to your lesson. Well, I titled this lesson the Duh lesson. You guys know what duh means, right? I'm from across the line in Alabama. We use that phrase. Duh. I hunt on a little place called Kill Mountain. In order to get to Kill Mountain, you have to drive through the drive-through at Hardee's in Gurley. It's on the map. Pull up to the drive-through window, 5:30 in the morning. Camouflage boots, camouflage pants, camouflage shirt, camouflage gloves, camouflage hat, camouflage bow propped up in my front seat. Little girl at the window go, you going hunting? No, there's an Indian problem on Kill Mountain. We're trying to fight fair. Yeah, I'm going hunting. Duh, right? I was in Walmart early one morning and buying the stuff I put on my fence because I don't want the EPA to catch me, so I shop early. And the stuff I spray there is a mixture and a concoction. Guy comes around the corner pushing a stroller, 2 little fat babies in it. Kid looks like he hadn't slept for months, pushing these 2 side-by-side strollers. And behind him comes this little girl carrying a 3rd one. I couldn't help myself. I walked right up to those kids and said, are these triplets? Well, duh, what I expect them to say. No, the 4th one's in the car. I mean, I knew they were triplets. I couldn't help myself. That's a duh. So Jesus is going to tell 3 stories. And the response to these 3 stories is, guess what? Duh. Because let me tell you what it's going to be like when if you want to prepare for the end of the world, notice this, 25:1. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins. Now, you know this story, right? You get these girls, and they've been invited to escort the wedding party at night. Now, in their culture, the big main event was the bridegroom, not the bride. That don't make any sense to me. I wouldn't swim through chocolate milk with my mouth open to watch some groom come down the aisle. But I've never seen an ugly bride, have you? But their big deal was the groom. And so the groom's coming into town, and these girls, these single girls, have been asked, escort the bridal party into the venue, but you're going to have to do it at night. Now, if you get asked to escort the bridal party at night, what should you bring with you? A lamp. And what do you feed a lamp? Oil. And so Jesus tells this story. You got these girls that get invited to a midnight wedding, and they brought their lamps, but some of them didn't take oil and some of them did. And the disciples were like, yeah? In the rescue world, the tactical world, 1 light is none, 2 lights is 1. If you go underground or go out in the dark and your life is dependent on a light and you bring 1 light, it's as good as not having 1. Because if it goes out, you're blind. 1 light is none, 2 lights is 1. Okay? And so Jesus tells you guys, if you got invited to a midnight wedding and you took your lamp with you, what should you also take with you? Oil. And they're like, yeah. Second story. The kingdom of heaven is like, this is verse 14, a man traveling to a far country. Now, how many times have you heard a lesson on the talents? Read that lesson about talents. Interest, money, usury, and accounts. Those are the words that's going to be used in that context. He's not talking about I can sing and dance. That's not what the word talents means. Now we take that word talent because it means something in our language that it didn't mean in their language, and he's talking about money. And a talent was 75 pounds of silver. And at the time that I did this, that would have been about $250,000. Now the exchange rate may differ. You may come up with a different money. But if your boss called you into the office today and said, hey, here's $250,000. I'll be back at the end of the quarter. What are you supposed to do with that money? Make more money. It's supposed to have babies, isn't it? Okay? I mean, that's all there is to it. Your boss brings you in and gives you $250,000 and says, when I come back into town, I'm going to want to talk to you. What you're supposed to do with that money is obvious. You're not supposed to bury it. Now, the guy with 5 talents doubled it. The guy with 2 talents doubled it. The guy with 1 talent, what did he do? Hid it. And the disciples read this story, and it's almost like a comedy of errors. Why would a guy take $250,000, a 75-pound block, literally a kettlebell of silver, and go hide it in the ground? You got to be a special kind of stupid to behave that way, right? And so he tells them that. He says, if you want to prepare for the kingdom of heaven, if you got invited to a midnight wedding, what would you do? Well, I'd bring a light. If your boss gave you $250,000, what would you do with it? I'd invest it, and it would make more money. And they're standing there going, yeah, Lord, tell me something I don't know. And then he tells the third story. And then he doesn't say it is likened to. This is emphatic. Because after he deals with some of the details of the talent story, verse 31, when? Not the kingdom of heaven is going to be like this, but when the Son of Man comes in all his glory and all his holy angels with him, he'll sit on the throne of his glory. The nations will be gathered before him, and he'll separate them one from another as the shepherd divides the sheep from the goats, and he'll set the sheep on his right hand, the goats on his left, and the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And the righteous will answer, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you drink? Or a stranger and clothe you? Or take you in and naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say, surely as I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. And then he'll say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, you did not take me in. I was naked, you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, you did not visit me. And then they will answer him and say, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or stranger or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? And he will say, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. Lord, how do we prepare for the end of Jerusalem? And how do we prepare for the end of the world? End of Jerusalem, you don't have to worry about it. You'll see it coming. Josephus will tell us that of all the people that died in the siege of Jerusalem, not a single Christian perished there. Because the Christian prophet said, hey, the Romans are coming, the Romans are coming, the Romans are coming into town. He said, I prepare you for the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, you want to be prepared for the end of the world? Okay, we got to go somewhere, we got to do something, we're going to do it at night. What should you bring? A light. Your light burns oil. What should you also bring? Extra oil. All right, here's some money that our boss has put us in charge of. What should we do with that money? Invest it, use it, make it grow. Everybody knows that, right? You leave here today, and you run into a guy who's sick, helpless, weak, confined, lacking in resources. What should you do? By this shall all men know you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. See, these are not 3 separate stories making 3 separate points. These are 3 stories building to a crescendo where he says, you know what to do at a midnight wedding. You know what to do if your boss gives you an investment. What should you do if your boss lets you run into a guy who's sick or hurt or naked or homeless or confined or infirmed. You want to prepare for the coming of the end of the world? It's as obvious as oil in a lamp and money in a bank. It's the way you treat people. By this shall all men know you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. Hey, Lord, what's the greatest commandment? Love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. It is our job, and it is super important for people to see Jesus in us. But it is much, much more important for us to see Jesus in them. Because if I drive back to Huntsville today and there's a guy with his thumb out in the air, if that were Jesus, I wouldn't drive by him. If I drove by and saw a guy struggling with a car in a ditch and it were Jesus, I wouldn't drive by him. And if somebody on my street, I realized their mother or father's in a hospital, and if it were Jesus' house, I wouldn't ignore that. And Jesus tells these three stories, not as three separate things, but as a didactic triad, as a teaching tool that says, you get what to do with midnight weddings and lamps and oil. You get what to do with $250,000. Do you get what you do with people who are in need and hurting and struggling and need your help? That's Christianity. And that's how you prepare for the coming of the end of the world. Because God said, if you don't see me in them, I can't see me in you. And if we don't respond to the obvious opportunities for ministry, and evangelism is not quit what you're doing and go to some foreign country. When Jesus gave the role of evangelism to his disciples in Matthew 28, he says, go ye. That word go ye is an aorist participle in Greek. It's a continuing action verb, and it means as you are going about. So as you farm, or as you teach, or as you coach, or as you attend school, or as you babysit, or as you jog, or as you drive between Winchester and Huntsville, as you are going about, you do what you can to make disciples. Now, how do you do what you can to make disciples? You find people who are hurting, who are helpless, who are lonely, who are hungry, who are thirsty, who are confined, who are infirm, who are inadequate, and you minister to them. That's how Jesus responds to his disciples' question, when will these things be? And when will be the coming of the end of the ages? So I can tell you how to prepare for the destruction of Jerusalem. But this is how you prepare for the coming of the kingdom of God. It's as obvious as oil in a lamp and money in the bank. You guys know who Morgan Freeman is? Yes. So he's an actor. He grew up in Tennessee, but his family moved to a little farm outside Batesville, Mississippi. He finished his growing up in Batesville, Mississippi, and as he got to be a little more wealthy, he bought the little family farm, added 100 acres to it, and it's kind of his retreat. When he's not doing his thing out on the West Coast, he comes home and is this little farmhouse in Mississippi. His brother still lives there. His brother's a plumber. And Morgan Freeman would come home. I read this in an article on an airplane one time. And he said he was home, and his brother's like, hey, you need to go down and visit the school. You're a famous actor. You need to go to the school and let the children meet you. You need to go. And it was always on him. And Mr. Freeman, my understanding, had donated money to the school, bought computers for the school, but never been to the school. Well, finally, he's home one weekend, and his brother like, hey, you got to go, you got to go. So they go down to this little country school in Batesville, Mississippi. I think it was a second grade classroom. They walk in the door, and when they walk in the back door, the teacher goes, children, look who's here. And the little boy in the third row goes, it's the plumber. You see, the plumber doesn't have a poster with his name on it. And the plumber doesn't have an Emmy or a Grammy. And the plumber doesn't have $1 million. But if your house is being flooded because a pipe burst, who comes to your house? If the pipes are froze and they're going to have to cancel Christmas, who crawls under your crawl space with a torch? If the bathroom is stopped up and they have to cancel your birthday party, who shows up at your house and gets in all that mess with you? The plumber. What would happen if our influence in our community was such that when we got out at Walmart, or when we got out at a gas station, or we stepped out at a ball field, somebody went, it's the Christian? Because we've been there when they were hungry or thirsty or naked or sick or in prison or confined. You don't prepare for the coming of the Messiah and to take care of the people that you pass by every day. It's as obvious as oil in a lamp and money in the bank. Let's pray. Father, thank you for